Hi, this is the Sword and the Pen Reflections. It is my casual alternative to a channel that's over there. We are doing a joint critique today with Professor Perlmutter. Actually, what started out as a collaborative critique kind of evolved into just a general discussion on storytelling in movies and TV shows and adaptations in general, just kind of theorizing why movies like this are so successful and continue to be made, but I'll just let you figure it out as you listen. So Professor Perlmutter reached out to me proposing this joint critique, and let me go ahead and have him introduce himself real quick. Professor?
Hi, I'm David Perlmutter, and I'm a professor of media at Texas Tech University. And for about 30 years, I've been writing books and articles and teaching and talking about all forms of culture, mostly political communication, but also movies and television and all the categories that are now pretty blurry. And what I try to do for my students, because every semester I have about 200 18 to 22-year-olds, so I have a sort of built-in focus group of what's trending and what's interesting in the world of content and popular culture. And one of the things I'm really trying to do is get them to pay attention and discover fantastic independent content creators like you. I only discovered you about a month ago, and now I recommend you within my syllabi as like, please watch this. Wow. As really the best of incisive, technically very excellent, but also really, really thoughtful, intellectually deep media criticism. So I'm here as a fan, and I just like to talk about a movie I saw. I saw it because it was recommended actually by a number of my students, and I saw it, and I guess I have some disagreements with them on the quality and the amazingness of this film, but that's what we can talk about.
Nice. Yeah, I was really surprised when you reached out to me. I felt really honored that a professor who teaches this sort of thing was reaching out and saying like, hey, I think your channel's great. I was like, really? I'm struggling here, but I'm doing my best. So I never had any interest in The Gorge. I don't think I even saw a trailer for it until you told me about it. And so I decided to take a look. And the trailer I knew immediately was not Oscar material. Like, this is not that kind of movie, and it probably wouldn't have interested me except for the actors who were in it, and also that it was produced by Apple, which has done some really great shows. And then my mom watched it, and I was like, hey mom, let me know if it's any good, because she's like, oh, it's really interesting so far. She was like halfway through when I talked to her, and at the end she came back to me, she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, oh great, okay. So I went and took a look at it, and I think we're in agreement in a lot of things, but I think that I also have a few things I'm a bit more forgiving of. And anyway, so let's go ahead and get into this. So I want to do first a big spoiler warning for the entire movie of The Gorge. We're going to talk about it from beginning to end, including little details and revelations. So if you haven't seen it, go ahead and hit pause, go watch it and come back. Or if you don't care, then you can go ahead and watch this all the way through. But this is a critique of The Gorge, which is produced by Apple TV. It is directed by Scott Derrickson, who directed Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which I've never seen either of those. Well, actually, I saw Doctor Strange. Exorcism of Emily Rose, and the show Snowpiercer, not the movie, the show. And the writer was Zach Dean, who wrote The Tomorrow War, Deadfall, 24 Hours to Live, and Fast X, which I think is like a Fast and Furious spinoff. I'm not really sure. Or maybe it's Triple X because it has Vin Diesel in it. I don't know. It stars Miles Teller and Anya Taylor-Joy, and Sigourney Weaver is briefly in it as well. So I'm going to give a brief synopsis. So this is your final warning. There are spoilers. It'll take me about 2 minutes to get through the entire thing. Plug your ears if you don't want to hear it, or just whatever. Here we go. Two elite snipers, Levi Kane, a former U.S. Marine, and Drasa, a Lithuanian operative, are assigned to guard opposite sides of a mysterious gorge for a year, cut off from the world. Levi takes the West Tower, relieving JD, this other guy, who warns of hollow men, which are these weird creatures, automated defenses, and a stray dog protocol that's tied to air raid sirens. Now, Drasa, on the east side, grapples with her father's planned suicide, which is a whole back drama we get before going into this. Though forbidden to communicate, Drasa breaks protocol with signs, literal signs where she's written on paper so that he can look through his binoculars and see what she's writing. It sparks a sharpshooting contest with Levi, and they defend their towers together from the Hollow Men and end up growing closer together through games of chess and just sharing fun moments with each other, which was cute. 6 months in, Levi zip lines over to Drasa's side, and their bond deepens with dancing and poetry and definitely some banging. When he's coming back on the zip line, it snaps because some Hollow Men are climbing up the wall and trigger some mines, and he drops down into the gorge. Drasa parachutes after him, and they discover a warped ecosystem where plants and animals and insects are all mutated and stuff. And this is from a World War II bioweapons lab leak in the gorge. Now run by what's called Dark Lake. It's a corporation that's trying to create super soldiers. They have this stray dog protocol that they've told Levi about, and they discover that this is actually a nuclear failsafe. Like, in case these creatures get out, they're going to just destroy everything. Using a jeep, they escape from the gorge, and they agree to quarantine separately for 5 days just to make sure they haven't brought anything out. And that's when Levi's handler reveals Dark Lake's role and the site's compromise. So then the two of them are pursued by Dark Lake. They're going to neutralize them because you can't have witnesses to this sort of thing. But that's when Drasa and Levi say, you know what? No way. We are going to expose everything, and we're going to trigger the stray dog nuclear blast and destroy it all. So they get separated in the chaos and blow up the gorge. They kill Sigourney Weaver, and everything's exposed. And Drasa quarantines herself for a while and then goes to France as she planned. And Levi does not end up arriving. And so she opens up a letter from him, and it's a poem that he said he wrote for her. Sorry, I had to laugh at that part. That
was the only part you had to laugh at?
Oh, I laughed at so many parts, but that was, one of them. But a month after she thinks he's dead, he just shows up at the restaurant she's waitressing at for some reason. And he's like, hey, let's have some pie, rabbit pie. And they kiss and, happily ever after, the end. So that is the summary of the story. Quick, before we get into the critique, please like, subscribe, and comment, even if it's just with an emoji. It is a free way to support this channel. Or if you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon, Ko-fi, or hit the money heart thanks button down below. Any support helps at all because most of my videos get demonetized because I use so many clips and things. Anyway, we're getting right into the critique. So, Mr. Professor Perlmutter, would you like to kick us off with your first critique?
I admire your critiques so much. I'm going to be very happy to listen to you. There are a couple of things that occurred to me right away, and they were sort of side notes to the actual plot. But let's step back a second. The macro plot here is, since World War II, when this setup was created of this lab to create Evil Dead I don't know how to describe them except Evil Dead, because they're so much like Evil Dead we've seen from a lot of other movies, which is a point we'll get back to. But there's something here that really bothers me as somebody who teaches a class of global communication and has written books about like war and the media, is that the geopolitics of this movie is unaware of any change that's happened since 1947 because they have this, the heroine is this super sniper, and we can get into the super sniper who is apparently better than the best sniper in the entire planet. Okay, that's fine. She's Lithuanian, but she's a member of the Eastern group. Now, I am really shocked that the country of Lithuania has not lodged a diplomatic protest because nobody in Lithuania sees themselves as a minor ally of Russia. They are really worried about being invaded by Russia. Their entire geopolitics are, we're members of NATO, we're members of the European Union, we're worried about Russia. And yet a Lithuanian sniper, who, by the way, operates on the behest of Russia, apparently, on Lithuanian soil, which would really get you the attention of the Lithuanian Internal Security Service.
Yeah.
Especially assassinating people. And you're wondering, like, you're working for Russia as an assassin. I guess you only assassinate bad people who deserve it, right? Because that's geopolitics today as well. And why is Lithuania in the Eastern group? Nobody associated with this movie said, Lithuania is not Eastern. It's a Western, Eastern Europe, but like a Western allied country. They would never volunteer to serve Russia. I'm sorry for going all professor on you.
No, that's fine.
That's such a basic premise. That would be like in this World War II movie, Japan and the United States fight France together. That's the equivalent of what they've done here. And I really wish they'd thought about it, and I want to personally apologize to the population of Lithuania on behalf of the United States of America.
I think I'm a little bit more forgiving of that particular element because to me, that was not the focus of this story at all. This is clearly a fantasy, and there should be rules to fantasy, but what the geopolitical status of the world is, I suppose you could say it could be anything, whatever the writer decides. The focus for me was the relationship of these two characters. They spent so much time building that up in the beginning. This is like a 2-hour, 8-minute movie, I think. And I think half of it was just the two characters getting their backstory and then having them bond. And then for some reason, the second half had a bunch of action thrown in. So I was a little more forgiving of that. But I do have... I have some relatives who are in the military and also an expertise in weaponry. So I was picking up on a few things. One of the notes that you had, Professor, was that we'll get to it when we get to it, but you had some notes on the weaponry, and that stood out to me a little bit too. But I would say, as far as this whole scenario goes, I was most interested in these two characters forming a bond. They were both former snipers, or they are current snipers. They're hitmen, basically. And they have trauma that they carry with them. And now they're both put in close proximity to each other and told you're not allowed to speak to each other. But one of them breaks and starts talking to the other, and then the other engages, and they form this really fun little bond. I was the most interested in what was happening then, and I love action movies. I'm really into action movies. They have to be good, though. And the action was like the side dish that somebody brought in you weren't expecting, and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I have to eat this too. For me, it was mostly about these two characters, which you don't need a fantasy to tell this story. So,
well, I really am interested in your opinion on this. One of the critiques that's pretty wide about this movie is that it's 7 genres in one. And obviously,
it is.
It can fail trying to be 7 genres in one. We should point out, first of all, our opinion has to be a minority opinion because it is the #1 movie premiere in the history of Apple TV. So it's a very popular movie. You mentioned some other ones, which, The Terminal War, I guess I wasn't the biggest fan. That, again, hugely popular. I have a quote here. I noticed on my Apple screen this quote from The Wrap. I don't know what The Wrap is, but it said the romance sniper monster movie you've been waiting for. And I noticed that they only put that up for one day, and now I don't see that as the descriptor of the movie. So I'm wondering whether Apple was sort of in on the joke and they say, hey, this is going to be campy fun, and we're not trying to sell this as, deep shock horror or, Pride and Prejudice with zombies or something like that. We're going to say, yeah, this is a fun pastiche. And I really, let's start out, and I'm going to monologue here for about two minutes.
Go for it.
This movie has some really strong, good qualities. The cinematography was terrific. I think the direction was terrific. The sound design was terrific. I'd like to buy the soundtrack. I thought it was an excellent soundtrack. You have 2 very appealing actors here doing a credible job. I think they have to say some pretty leaden lines of exposition, but that word chemistry that probably drives people over 60 like me crazy, but like they have chemistry. Mm-hmm. They're interesting to look at, and they talk and just there's a lot of really good elements here. This is not, to be great grade Z zombie slasher film number 57. but these plot issues really sort of get in the way. And the question I want to ask you, because you're famous for the Wheel of Time critique that you're going through right now, and which again attracted me to watch your show, because I thought, gosh, how thoughtful and all these things that she's observing that I've missed. I have heard over the years, I think it was Larry Niven, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, in the world
The big
of science
sci-fi
fiction.
writers, yeah.
Yeah, sci-fi writers, but also fantasy writers. I think George R. R. Martin said this. I don't know whether Robert Jordan said it, but like sci-fi and fantasy have to have hard walls.
Yeah.
There has to be rules that are followed. You can't just randomly make stuff up. So I'm sort of intrigued by your comments. Not a challenge, but just like, I get it that like, okay, maybe this is an alternative universe where like,
that's what I'm talking about.
Different.
Yeah.
But like, I would want to have been told a little bit more about that.
Same.
That makes sense?
Yes. So, I do follow the rule, or believe in the rule, I should say, that if you're writing fantasy, it doesn't mean that you can break the rules that you set up. If you're going to establish rules, you must live within them. You must write within the confines of those rules. And to have something like a soft magic system or a soft world that you have built, that indicates that it's extremely flexible and undefined. So you're not really telling people what the rules are, and it seems like it can do a lot. But there should be limits there as well. Otherwise, you can throw God into the machine at any time, and it's going to spoil the fun of anybody who is watching, wondering how your protagonist is going to get out of certain situations. Now, the reason why this did not bother me with the setup of, her being from coming there for Lithuania, was because I was figuring, okay, the world outside of this does not necessarily matter. I don't know if there's actually a company called, what was it, Black Lake or
Evil
something?
Incorporated?
The Dark Lake. I don't know if there is such a corporation doing things. I figure they just established that there is a conflict between East and West, and that's all that's important. I thought that she had some sort of, she's Lithuanian herself, but she is doing work for the Russian government. Not that she herself is employed by Lithuania, but she is employed by Russia. So I could believe that. But it was so vague and unimportant. It was a throwaway bit of information for me. So I was like, okay, they don't care about this. They're just saying East and West, and that's all you got to know. And I'm like, okay, I could see East and West being told, especially with, Cold War history, they cannot speak to each other. The end. But if they were going to make that into a bigger deal, where it's the fact that she's Lithuanian and what the politics are of Lithuania are very important, then I would have wanted to know a little bit more about it. But it didn't really come into the story. My
question is that, okay, later on, Sigourney Weaver, always terrific Sigourney Weaver, in my opinion, reprising her role from Cabin in the Woods. In fact, I guess you could have a fan theory, this is the same universe as Cabin in the Woods.
Could be.
That like Sigourney somehow escaped from this movie and ended up in Cabin in the Woods destroying the world. Like, oh, spoiler there too. Or trying to stop the world from being destroyed. But in the movie, she, the evil director of the evil corporation, who, by the way, only speaks with an evil backdrop. There's a great scene where she's talking on the radio with our male protagonist, Sniper, and she's got those Dubai buildings in the background, just like...
They look like horns coming out of the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, literally Cabin in the Woods there. And she says, well, we're doing this for America. And of course, earlier we see a backdrop of her here in this picture with American flags. Yeah. We're trying to build Evil Dead super soldiers for America. But wait a minute. The Russians are sharing all of this. So like you're giving to Russia super soldier technology. Again, that is definitely a jarring loophole. Stop there. But
the thing is that they have fixed that with the loophole that it's not actually a government operation. This is a private corporation operation, and they sell to both the East and the West. That's why they're pulling from both sides. But so I think there were a lot of times throughout this movie where I was like, I have a problem with that. And then somebody would say a quick line and I'm like, and that's how they are excusing this. When we go through, I've got a little notepad of notes that I took while I was watching. there were a few moments like that where I had a complaint, and they said something, and that technically solves the problem, but the way that you deliver the limitations of your world with just a single line like that, it's a very lazy way to do that, to just say like, oh, well, you can't do this because of some other thing. It's as if the scriptwriter had an editor who said, hey, what about this scenario? Like, oh, don't worry, I'll just put a line in there and say, so that makes it impossible. That loophole is closed now. So I saw signs that this was well reviewed and edited, but not to create a high level entertainment, like something Oscar worthy. This was kind of like what do you call it? Like a Marvel movie, but with maybe a little bit more interesting scenario because you're not dealing with superheroes. But to me, it was on par with a lot of the Marvel movies. So I don't know. But do we want to go through chronologically some of the things that we saw? Or do you want to go on to the next note that you had? You had some good notes that you sent me, so we can go off of yours. And then if I have any that come in, I usually like to go chronologically, but that would take us, I think, maybe forever. I know I've put that in the notes for this meeting, but maybe we just go note by note.
Deal with sort of macro, they're set up in this situation.
Yeah.
And again, this is one of those questions where the audience, I'm willing to accept, by the way, I'm willing to accept a lot of stuff. I don't sit there in movies going like, that is not an authentic teacup from 1862.
Oh, yeah,
I'm going to stop watching this movie. I'm willing to go along. I just can only take so much. And I felt that this movie exceeded my suspension of disbelief.
It did.
Let's start out with the very beginning is that, okay, these are both... I have a visceral dislike of when I'm told that this is the best in the world at something. Because, there's a lot of competition. Like, for example, for sniper, there's a lot of snipers in the United States Army, the British Army, the Israeli Army, the Russian Army, the Ukrainian Army. There's a lot of master snipers out there. And so when we're told these are the two best snipers in the world, and they've actually, done the furthest shot in the world, that stretches it a little bit, but okay, fine. They are set up, as you said, on a gorge. It's a big gorge. Now the gorge is somewhere, I don't know, it's got to be like northern Scandinavia or something. It really didn't look like is Montana? I don't think so.
No, and I think they discussed that they're somewhere in the northern hemisphere, and they thought, I can't remember the exact thing, but they kind of theorized where they're located. So they addressed that this has to be somewhere probably in Eastern Europe. I don't know. So it doesn't, to me, it doesn't. It's a gorge in the mountains that nobody looks at, and satellites can't take pictures of it. So,
but that's explained, as I recall, right?
It is
some sort of satellite dampener or
the
something.
The cloaking
device, yeah.
Yeah, and the satellites don't suspect a thing. All those satellites up there.
There's just a blank spot on the map, between the Russian and Norwegian border, and nobody cares what's going on there, right? Norwegian army ignores it or whatever. But going back to the simple, and you talked about the dyad, these are very sympathetic actors. My students love both of these actors.
Oh yeah,
they are very, very hot in the sense of being successful, and people like them. They are good actors objectively. And they're put on the opposite side of a gorge and then given ultra high power binoculars and told for a year, don't contact each other. Does that sound, that's a little stretch there, isn't it?
It is. And for me, the reason for that was not a stretch, because we have this going on with North and South Korea right now. They do not talk to each other, but they're all alone out in the middle of nowhere, no other people. The scenario itself is hard to believe, because what if one of them gets hurt? What if one of them gets sick? What are they going to do? You can only call in for help once a month, apparently. So that was, just the fact that they were isolated by themselves was the most unbelievable thing. Yes, people do it all the time, but they also die out in those situations.
Yeah, they're isolated by themselves. Sorry to interrupt, but they're also supposed to do, this is where, the military, they have specialists. Like, they are actual people who are snipers, all right? But, the snipers are not like trained drone technicians and trained mine technicians and trained barbed wire deploy. I mean, just to have one person, like there's a scene where he lowers down and he's sort of fixing this auto destruct mine.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking did you learn to troubleshoot auto destruct mines?
I had problems with those mines anyway, because they were on two strings against a wall. What if a wind starts moving it and it smashes into the wall? That's a problem in itself. But yeah, as far as their technical expertise, I could believe him having a military background where he's dealt with some things, because you typically pick things up. But depending on what role he had in the military, because I think he said he was a Marine or something like that. But she has the same responsibilities that he has. I could not imagine, what military did she go and serve in? Because that's not what they would have a woman. I don't think there's any military where we're expected that a woman is going to have the same experience on the battlefield as a man does. They're just not going to be put in certain combat situations. So I can't see her having the same level of expertise experience in resetting a mine or in repairing a turret gun. I just don't see. Yeah, I could not see that. But again, the whole military bit of this, their background being snipers and whatever, that was a cute little touch to their personal backgrounds. But I don't know if it was necessary for the most interesting parts in this entire story, which was the two of them not being allowed to talk to each other, coming from wildly different backgrounds, and then forming this bond. And you could have set this story over North Korea, where there are no monsters, but two people are told they can't talk to each other, and they're in this hey, it's a spot out in the woods, but we can't have people crossing the line, and so just be out there, because they'll see people in the tower and they'll avoid going across if they see that there's people in the towers, and okay. And so they're out there all by themselves, getting bored. She's suffering from depression, he's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, and they eventually reach out to each other. I could see that sort of, maybe there's a storm or a hurricane that comes through, and so they end up being really isolated for a while. You could set this scenario without the monsters, and the most interesting part of the story still makes sense. The whole them going out and repairing equipment along this wall, it adds to the things of it's not likely that she could do these things. I could see, yes. There was one scene where
they grow tomatoes as well. I thought that of all the skills
how are tomatoes growing at this high elevation in the fall?
Svalbard, in northern Norway, is that a thing? I mean, I'm sure during the summer.
You need very nice warm weather and sunlight for tomatoes, and that's not what the situation that they were in. That was one of those things.
The winters didn't seem that bad. I mean, she puts on a blanket once.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking
I saw that too.
Have you been up to Lapland? And up like Murmansk, it's minus 50, with 30 feet of snow. So but the relationship, again, these are two sympathetic characters. If you just go along with the plot, you got to give credit. I mean, you really have to give credit to actors who find themselves struggling with a script, but they're just game and they go through and they definitely, you're cheering for them. You like them. They go through all the challenges that they do, fighting evil dead monsters and evil corporation and whatever. But you got to give them credit. I mean, I don't think it's Oscar-worthy credit, but you got to give them credit for pulling out and not doing campy shtick as actors, just playing it straight. In fact, if you're in a movie like this, probably the best thing to do is just play it straight. Yeah.
And they definitely did. Both of them, I thought, did an excellent job with their performances, despite the flaws in the writing and the world building. It was an entertaining, like you said, it was a campy sort of monster flick. that it served its purpose, I think, in that respect. It's a disappointment because they had these great actors, and the situation that brought the characters together was interesting. That had potential. That could have become an Oscar-worthy story, but you would have to take these ridiculous monsters out of it or make it more sophisticated in some way and just focus more on the relationship. I don't know about you, but I sort of checked out once the monsters came in. I was like, okay. I mean, it was no longer something I was interested in, the two of these people and their relationship with each other. It was like, oh, wait, there's this monster that's coming after them. It's not a mystery what's coming after them because we've already seen it. Like, we saw the monsters and we know what they are. They're these weird mutated creatures. So we're not wondering what's coming after them. So there isn't that mystery to go by anymore, except, what created them? Within 2 minutes, I was like, yes, this is some sort of a lab created these weird creatures. And, they had soldiers going in there and then they never came out. So we're going to see that as well. None of that was original. None of that was something that was super important to the relationship of these two characters. It was a side mystery thrown into a very interesting developing relationship between two people from different situations but similar backgrounds. So it's such a confusing story. Confused, I would say. It doesn't really know what story it wants to tell because it did a great job with these actors in the first half, and then the second half it became a Marvel movie. So Professor, you were telling me that you wanted to talk about monster flicks, the type of movie that this might have been intended to be that we don't really get many of these days.
Right. So there was a genre of movie that existed once upon a time long ago and far away called the date movie. Mm-hmm. And a date movie had to have something, elements, people, plot, scenes that appealed to the stereotypical male and according to Hollywood, appeal to the stereotypical female. So typically it would be a movie where there was action, but there'd be a romance at the heart of the action. And so the date part about it is that one member of the date is willing to put up with something they're not that interested in as long as they get some of what they're interested in. And this movie felt like a compromise, but a sort of classic good compromise of like, okay, there's the kissy and there's the romance and the love, and then, okay, let's take a break now to kill some evil dead zombies, and then, okay, let's go back to our love. And then they end up hugging each other on the coast of France, about to have a wonderful dinner looking over a very romantic scenery. So like it's a perfect 1947 action on the Khyber Frontier movie in a lot of ways. It's very classic Hollywood. And I think maybe that's one of the successes of this movie is that you don't have to take away any message. You don't have to think deeply. It's got all the elements of a classic everything date night movie. And maybe that's why so many millions of people loved it.
I think that you're probably touching on something very true there. And we don't get a whole lot of movies these days with the big actors that seem to be trying to do that aren't Marvel. Something that isn't going to be attempting to become the next Oscar movie. And when you informed me that there were people who thought that this was Oscar worthy, I laughed because to me it seemed so obvious that it is not. But approaching it from this perspective, that it is meant to be a movie that has a bit of romance, has a bit of action, has some monsters, has some military stuff. And that being the date movie, as you described, that makes a lot more sense and actually makes it even more forgivable for me. If the purpose is to be a movie with a little bit of everything in it, I mean, yes, it could have been way better, but it wasn't so bad that I came away from it feeling like I wish I didn't sit through that. My life was ruined. Like, I didn't feel that way coming from this movie. If somebody told me that this is what was going to be on the roster for Oscar nominations, I'd say now I have a problem with it.
Well, part of what I appreciate with you, I did not read the entire Wheel of Time, excuse me. Well, I keep mixing them up.
Oh, I haven't either.
Series. Yeah, okay.
I'm in the process. I'm about almost halfway through.
I gave up on the show much earlier than you did. I guess you're planning to go through the entire whatever they do. You know,
yeah, that's a good way to describe what they're doing, is whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah. So I always, when I have these discussions with my students, and by the way, I really like to listen to them because, of course, I'm learning from them all the time, especially with new culture and new ideas. But I always talk about maybe it's less good or bad and more success. Like, is a movie effective in what it's trying to do? I'm going to watch a movie like an old classic like The Best Years of Our Lives or Sunset Boulevard, and I'm going to judge it in one category. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to judge Fast and Furious and maybe this movie in a different category.
Yeah.
And going back to the Oscars, I remember Steve Martin very early on made the comment that it was a shame that there wasn't an Oscar for Best Comedy and Best Comedy Performance. Because, it's hard to compare somebody in a drama where they're dying of a disease versus like a rollicking comedy. And both could be fantastically acted. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know, if there was a category for like Fun Movie of the Year, maybe this would win an Oscar for Fun Movie of the Year. I don't think it should, beat out, a deep stirring drama about, death in Finland or something like that. But it succeeds in its genre. We can still critique and wish it had made some better choices in that genre.
I could not agree more with that sentiment. And that's how I approach movies, especially because people ask me to rate a show or an episode or a movie. Tell us how you would rate it. And I'm like, well, rate it according to what? What am I comparing this to? Okay, I know Avatar, the Blue People, Aliens, James Cameron, those movies, you know what I'm talking about. They get a lot of harsh criticism from the writing community, people who focus on, the quality of the writing. And I go, you know what? It was exactly what I was expecting going into this. The story itself is nothing more than a vehicle by which James Cameron can share a visual thing, a spectacle. He is here to entertain us with how amazing his special effects are. That's pretty much the only thing he cares about. But he created a story that was done enough times that it usually gets a pretty positive response from an audience, that he figured we don't need to change much from this story. You get a little bit of Fern Gully and Pocahontas and Dances with Wolves. There you go. Like that's the story. It's a guy coming into a world that's, alien to him, and he wants to be part of it. And then he helps save the culture. Like that is such an overdone story, and it's very simple, and the writing, yes, was not spectacular. I mean, freaking unobtainium and this super evil corporation guy again. But I didn't care because I was not there to get this spectacular story. I was there to get spectacular visual effects. So I am very lenient on stories like that because they're not there to try to be a masterpiece of writing and directing. They're there to be a masterpiece of visual storytelling, like visuals, special effects, not even visual storytelling, just special effects. Those movies are worthy of Oscars for visual effects. For writing, no. Sorry. But yeah, this is not one that I would compare to even something like Terminator, which is more, I think the first one anyway, more serious. Alien, more serious than that. I'm trying to think of other science fiction, big explosions and fighting monsters or robots or whatever. I couldn't even compare them to that because they did not have this focus on the romance that we get in this. There was a little bit in Terminator, but it was such a side plot compared to this.
In terms of critique, one thing that does irritate me, and I spent a lot of time on social media sort of watching people discuss social media and regular media and use that as for discussions in class or what I'm writing about, is that I don't like it when people want both. Like they will say, I don't want to be the 9 billionth person to jump on Wheel of Time or House of the Dragon or some of these big budget shows. And to me, if you're going to say this is a big budget, $200 million serious epic, then you can't then also say, yeah, but you're judging it, let's just let it do anything it wants and have fun. Like once you've established what you're trying to achieve,
you got to stick with it.
You have to be judged by the standards of what you've said you've tried to achieve. And I don't like fans. I don't know what the word fan has become, very hard to define nowadays, but I don't like fans saying like, well, you're critiquing Star Wars, Ashoka, but it's just a fun fest. No, they didn't treat it like a fun, just nothing fest. They treated it as a super serious, dark, exploration. So I'm going to critique it by those rules. Just as long as we agree what the genre and the rules are, then we can be honest in our critiques.
Yeah, and a lot of people are going to butt heads simply due to a lack of, they're just not defining their terms in the debate. And that's a problem, I think, across debate in every area of debate at this point. But in filmmaking, you get that as well, where I was critiqued myself because of my critiques of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the live action. I saw it because people were saying, oh, Netflix wanted to create a Game of Thrones out of this kids show. And I said, I went into this expecting like the early movies of Harry Potter, and I got something that was easily that good. So my expectations were not the same, I think, as everybody else's. And I think it was right then that it became clear to me, I need to make sure that I am informing people of how I am judging a story. Because when I was told they're trying to make Game of Thrones out of Avatar, my impression was they wanted to create a show that was of the same kind of popularity as Game of Thrones. So Avatar: The Last Airbender it's a cartoon, and it's about these kids who go on this big epic adventure across a fantasy Asian world. And it drew in such a broad crowd, people who loved anime, people who loved martial arts, people who just loved great fantasy. They all came together really enjoying this story. And at the same time, it's a middle grade fantasy. It's not even young adult, it's middle grade, but it's very sophisticated middle grade. So that's what I went into judging this as. I did not think that they were trying to make Game of Thrones. And when I forgive it for making mistakes or doing things that aren't sophisticated, it's because I wasn't expecting Game of Thrones quality. I was expecting this is going to be very good middle grade epic fantasy. And that's all I wanted. But yeah, I think everybody should, when they're going into critiques, define what they're comparing this to, or try to bring in sort of their personal perspective of how this should be judged. Wheel of Time, I judged that as this is what they are trying to create to compare to Game of Thrones, because you see them doing it over and over again, where you have a lot of shock factor type of violence that they just throw in there. And I'm going, there was no reason for that to be in what I figured was starts out as like a teen sort of coming of age epic fantasy. It becomes very mature because it does dive into deeper subjects, but they went right out of the gates trying to make something that was going to be very dark and very adult, but the characters were not at that level in the books. So it's very hard to get that, to take a story that was written about young people discovering the world and saying, actually, they're really experienced in the world, and pass that off as believable.
Could I ask about one thing you just said there, which struck me, and I guess connecting to Wheel of Time, is that, and again, this is, I guess, my Gen X / Boomer Edge perspective here. I feel that in the old days, and there's a wonderful book about this, The Genius in the System, about the Hollywood system, where they would cast B movies with B actors, and they would cast A movies with A actors. And one of my critiques of all of cinema and television today is I feel the acting is wildly uneven. So Wheel of Time, you'll have a couple of people who are really master class actors and actresses. And then you'll have people like, was this somebody's nephew that just walked on and like and is carrying like an entire episode or something? Like there's no sense that like this person can't deal with it. Now, what the advantage the Gorge had, to bring it back to the Gorge, is you got Sigourney. It's a 3-person play. I mean, there's a fourth character and somebody's on the screen and somebody says, something in the
There's
cafe.
3 main characters that we hear from.
And you've got Sigourney Weaver. Okay, so check. You've got the best of the best there. And then you've got these two, the male actor and the female actor, who are very good. And this could have been a play. In fact, I was reading years ago about how like Aliens is a play that's produced in high schools. You can look up on YouTube Aliens High School, and you will see high school productions of Aliens. There's a play.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah. And they do, and these kids go all out, for the special effects. But I can imagine if somebody wanted to do a traveling company of The Gorge, the musical, with 4 people, they could do it.
They could,
but the point was that because it was only 4 people, there was no room for the huge cast where you have this wild unevenness. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. One thing that saved this movie was that they didn't have to worry about uneven acting because everybody was okay. Very good.
I think it was an unbalanced script. The story itself was unbalanced because there was such heavy focus on the backgrounds of these characters and them coming together and dealing with their respective trauma. And then suddenly, halfway through the movie, it becomes a major mystery what is in the Gorge, even though it was pretty much obvious from the beginning because we saw the monsters crawl out and then that it's some sort of an experiment. They did not maintain the focus of this is about 2 people coming together. It just switched gears partway through. I didn't have a huge problem with the fact that if we're looking at this as the date movie where it's just a romance with also some action and gore and whatnot. But I mean, it's very hard to judge this now, considering that is potentially what its goal was to just be a fun flick. But then what you're saying, why bring in these A-list actors to do this? Was it because we wanted to see Anya Taylor-Joy, fighting an evil monster like she's in a Marvel movie? Put her in a Marvel movie. I don't know. But I think it's just disappointing for me because it was so engaging in the beginning and then it became disengaging once they took the focus away from the relationships and they're like walking around in the Gorge going like, what's going on? What is this? They're in the church and they find these bodies slumped over in the church. They obviously were just sitting there when they died. And then he picks up something that was in a capsule and he goes, oh, cyanide. They all killed themselves or whatever. And he says this, he says something like, what could be worse than death? And I'm like, well, gee, I wonder, maybe it's what you just ran away from outside. Like, probably that. I don't know if he was asking rhetorically or if he was really wondering because it was said as if he was really wondering. But yeah. I didn't care anyway, because first of all, it was obvious. And secondly, that was that was not a focus in the story for the whole first half. I wish what they would have done to balance this script is take some of that mystery and put it in the first half of this movie. Really build up the mystery of what's going on in the Gorge. And I know it's like, oh, it's so mysterious. They literally tell you nothing about it, and suddenly it's a romance.
I mean,
it is in the trailer. I felt like I knew the story in the trailer from the trailer.
Again, I'd love to get your thoughts as somebody who's watched okay, so the theory of monsters, this is the grand theory of monsters we can discuss. Like, you can have a monster where you introduce the monster right away, and so for the rest of the film, you're really worried that monster is going to kill or hurt the protagonist, right? So that's one choice. We talk about choices, filmmakers, TV, whatever, novelists, whatever make, is like, page 1, here's the monster, okay? And then there's the other one where there's a mystery, and it's building up, and it's building up. Now, they both have, I guess, reasons why you would do it. You could have an effective movie or novel or TV show with both ones, right? But here it seemed to make the worst of both choices.
It did.
Because we see the monsters crawling up. And again, really, they get to just the edge and they almost make it over. And then they actually do. We got to go early here before they end up in the gorge. The monsters actually escape the gorge and threaten them in their fortresses. And you got to think, like, what doesn't it, I mean, where these amazing defenses, are pretty, like, shoddy, apparently.
Oh, I've got plenty of technical issues with the defenses.
Yeah, the threat, they're almost more in danger in, like, their bed than they are in the gorge itself.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you brought up an interesting point. You talked about there's the monster that you see from the beginning and you are worried about how are they, hopefully we don't get caught by that monster. And then there's the mystery. I would say probably in most cases, the second option, the mystery where you don't know what it is, that's a very world building science fiction sort of thing that's not focused on characters, whereas the first one gives you a lot of opportunity for characters because you know what's coming. So it's not a mystery. We're not wondering what's going to be happening. We're not trying to figure out how the world is, going to survive this. We just want our characters to survive an encounter with these creatures. It would have probably been better if they did know, what was in the gorge, because then we can, again, focus on just the two of them and how are they going to survive this. But even the characters themselves were so focused on, what is this? What's this mystery? It's like, I don't care. I don't care what's in the gorge. It's probably a lab leak. It's probably some experiment gone wrong. It's definitely military because of that drone that we saw go up and because you were both coming from military backgrounds. None of that should have been a focus in this story. But if it's just a survival movie, like the runaway from the monsters survival, you can get some really great character action. You can have the two of them trying to help each other through situations. I really enjoyed seeing the two of them down in the gorge, and it was like they were well coordinated with each other. I don't know how two people, especially the girl, unless she has been in a like urban combat situation before, how would she know to behave in this sort of situation? We'll get to that. But it's more interesting seeing how they would work together to survive. I didn't care about what the mystery was, and the characters themselves were so focused in on, what is this? I just wanted to see them live. If we wanted this to be more of a sci-fi, what the heck is going on, then they should have brought the mystery forward. We should have seen it earlier. We should have had the characters wondering what the hell is in the gorge a lot more aggressively, but they kind of just, we don't know what's in there. Okay. And then they're dealing with their traumas.
They stripped mystery over and over again. Like, let's just go back to a basic plot point, which is, I can sum up the plot of this movie in terms of like the mystery or like the plot of the, as usual, completely incompetent giant evil corporation that is too incompetent to actually exist. They've got, okay, so sometime after World War II, the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc agreed to use this gorge to have experiments to create super soldiers. And now here's where a plot choice that would be against convention to subvert expectation might have been more interesting, because he in his little cell up there on the watchtower on his side, he sort of gets to know some of the previous people who've been watchers, right? Including that British officer. We see a picture of him. We see a quote of him. And then, okay, we meet the British officer turned into a zombie. Now, we're setting up that the monsters are necessarily the bad guys, but this is 2025. What if the monsters were the good guys? What if it turned out like
they're being held prisoner down there?
The officer said, "Yeah, I've been turned into this monster. It's horrible. We keep trying to get out and escape, but these evil corporations."
I would have loved that.
Yeah,
that would have been so cool.
And I cannot believe in the writers' room somebody didn't say that. Like, well, what if the monsters turned out to be? One podcast I really enjoyed doing. That's a fantastic podcast. I want to give it a little shout out, called Monster Talk, where they look at monsters in media and reality, and they're skeptics like
I'll have
me,
the link
but-
in the description.
Yeah.
Monster Talk.
Monster Talk, Karen Stolznow and Blake Smith, great people. And I've been on there a couple of times, and sort of my shtick, my premise is that the only actual monsters in the world are humans. Like, all other animals just do what they do. Only humans, to quote a line from the great book Watership Down, sit around thinking of ways to make other lives miserable, right? So what if in this movie it turned out the only monsters were Sigourney Weaver and this corporation, and these poor people were trapped down there?
That would have been great.
They've been turned into something ugly. I mean, this is a very old-fashioned movie that ugly equals evil, right?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that a very, very, it's almost an offensive premise that because you're monstrous looking, you must be evil automatically. And if
the thing is that they do have a level of intelligence. And so I was kind of expecting something more with the monsters, but no, they're just monsters. They're just brainless monsters. And the part that got me was the backpack. Remember, she brings in the backpack. So there's a point where they're down in the gorge. They've joined up. The two of them are together, and they seek shelter in this bunker. It seems like a bunker. It's these big doors. They get in there. She sets down her backpack that has all the ammo in it, and they both reload, and then they go through the building. For some reason, they left the backpack there. I don't know why she would leave the backpack, but they didn't. When they come back after discovering this laboratory and this video where it explains that it was a lab leak and whatnot, she comes back, and the backpack is gone. And I'm going, wait. So the monsters came in and grabbed the backpack and left. Like, they opened the doors, came in, grabbed the backpack, and then closed the doors, and then set the backpack out in the middle of a field with a tripwire trap sort of situation going, like, this is the bait for a trap that they've set. They're intelligent. These are intelligent monsters. When did if they have the capacity to do this sort of thing, to think strategically, why are they not also good guys? It was a big moment. I watched this with my brother and my mother because I made her sit and watch it with me because she'd already seen it. I was like, you're gonna watch this with me again. My brother was there to help me with weaponry. He's got a professional expertise in weaponry, but so that bugged me so much. And then later, the girl gets captured, and the monster is setting up a barbecue. He's going to cook her and eat her. Literally a barbecue. There's a grill, and he's stoking the fire underneath it, and then he's going to put her on the grill. I was like, what is happening? What is the intelligence level of these creatures? You bring up the
he should have had a refrigerator that he opened.
Yeah.
And he was looking at the choices of barbecue sauce, and he went like, okay, I think this is sort of a sweet, tangy, human that I'm going to barbecue, and picked it out, something.
It went from science fiction to fantasy the moment they touched that backpack, because everything else I could kind of like, okay, maybe it's, sort of like in Annihilation, where the DNA of the plants and the animals and the people kind of mush together, and they sort of continue doing whatever it is that they were doing, but it's all sort of instinctual. But this was strategic thinking, and I think even the guy goes, "They're messing with us." I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, there's thinking tactically, and I'm like,
the filmmakers, right? It's that they're maybe that was an ad lib line, and they said, "Let's leave it in" or something.
Oh my gosh, it was so ridiculous.
Let's talk about the monsters a little bit more.
Yes, go ahead.
I understand it's a massive challenge today. If you're making a movie and there's monsters, what do? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, what is a new monster? Personally, I don't watch a lot of monster movies, but when I do, it seems like nobody's thought up a really new looking alien or monsters in quite some time. I did appreciate the Amy Adams movie that you will fill in immediately for me, that I'm blanking because of
Arrival.
Arrival. I did appreciate the aliens there. It's based upon this award-winning short story by Ted Chiang, who's a famous science fiction short story writer. And the aliens in Arrival think differently and look differently than a lot of aliens we've seen before. And I guess I had to give that movie points for just thinking out of the box in terms of aliens.
And you notice we didn't really see them. I think that they understood we can't.
Yeah.
There's
they
no
were misty.
Yeah. We saw something of them, but not. We didn't really see them.
That's right. Maybe I missed that. I thought they were, something like what they appeared to be, but they were different. Let's put it.
No.
Way.
We saw parts of them, is what I mean. Like we saw she gets down into it and she's able to look up, but we don't really see what she's seeing because it just disappears off into the mist.
Which is probably better.
Great. Yeah, it leaves it up to imagination.
Let me go back in time to once upon a time. There was the greatest show that I thought I'd ever watched in the world called Game of Thrones.
It was so good. The early seasons were so good.
Yes, and I was saying, there are other shows in other genres that I think is great, but I said, man, I have never, and I wasn't a real big watcher of fantasy genre to begin with, but like I'd read Lord of the Rings and I read Game of Thrones, and like this is peak high, grim dark. Just this is amazing. And I remember this one scene. I don't think I'm giving anything away, where Daenerys is in a building and she's trapped and these people are going to hurt her, and she sets it on fire and the building burns down and she comes out because she's a Targaryen, right? Mm-hmm. And she's got these eggs. She had these dragon eggs, and the dragon eggs hatch and these little baby dragons are on top of her. Now, that could have been the end of the show in the sense of like, oh God, they're going to go to like some children's show of like little baby dragons who talk or something like that. But the special effects, the cinematography, the gravitas of the moment were done so well. I was going like, those are baby dragons. Where did they get, where in Hollywood? I know you can get raccoons and like trained, stunt cats, but like, where do you get baby? I mean, I was almost ready to believe that there was a cryptid baby dragon they'd brought in there. It was done so well. And I feel that we just fail so consistently to create a living, plausible monster. And this one, it seemed like by the way, I don't agree with people who said that it was bad special CGI. I actually thought the CGI was okay. I just thought what was being CGI'd looked like an average of The Hobbit and Evil Dead and 50 other movie monsters.
I was thinking The Walking Dead and Annihilation. Have you seen Annihilation?
Yes. That mixture, DNA mixture. Yeah. It just. I was wondering why didn't they just say, look, we got $80 million budget, which I know is low in Hollywood. That's how much the Gorge cost. It was like a cheap.
That movie. Is very modest. Yeah, I did not realize it was that cheap. That was very good for an $80 million movie.
Yeah, and I'm thinking Dial of Destiny, $300 million, and I thought it was just terrible CGI. But they so points to them. But like, is it just impossible to think up of a monster that people go, oh, that's different? Nobody tries anymore to do that? To me, one of the reasons I stopped watching, I think after the fourth episode, The Wheel of Time, was that I felt that the Trollocs?
Trollocs, yeah.
Trollocs, yeah.
They're the Minotaurs.
I've forgotten. Are they as derivative in the book as they are from like orcs and trolls in Tolkien? They're
basically the same, pretty much.
Yeah.
There's more interesting versions of them. You get bird-like ones and pig-like ones in the book, but we pretty much only saw minotaurs in the.
So they're like a universal monster that can be adapted to mythology. But like, is it just impossible to think up of a monster that people go, oh, that's different? Nobody tries anymore to do that?
I think that we're definitely going to be seeing unique monsters come into existence. But I think people will be, from what I know of what happens in like the 3-body problem, the monsters in that are going to be something we haven't seen before. But I think that there's this belief that if it's a monster that you can't kill easily, that makes it scary. I think that there's more to fear than just I can't stop it as easily as I want to. But then you've got these guys shooting them and that kills them. I'm trying to think of.
And there's no hook. Like in the Evil Dead and like the Walking Dead, like you have to shoot them in the brain. These monsters, like he's trapped by a tree monster, like a root tree monster.
I like that.
Shoots the root tree monster 3 times, and I'm going like,
and that let go. Then
kill a root tree monster, you just shoot 3 times, and they, I mean, what?
I was kind of thinking there would be a fire thing involved because she had all those candles. I was expecting that the only way you can kill them is to set them on fire. That's what I was expecting. But even that wouldn't have been so new. Do
they have a blood circulation? I understand. Look, like they just didn't
have eyeballs.
Explain anything, but like they were the easiest to kill monsters I've ever seen.
They were easy to kill, and yet they were super strong. But she could wrestle with this giant tree man. Okay. I mean, I have so many notes, and I'm just occasionally one pops into my head. We're getting a little sidetracked from the discussion on creating a new kind of a monster. I do think that there isn't. We haven't completely sapped the pool. People are very creative. Somebody will come along and think of another a rival, or like I find the unseen enemy to be extremely interesting, but it doesn't have to be completely unseen, like the effects of the enemy. Have you ever seen The Hot Zone? It's a true story about an Ebola breakout which has like a 90%, there has like a 10% survival rate. So like 90% of people would die if they get it. And it's a true story of how it did get out, and they stopped it before it got too many people killed. But it was crazy. That and like Chernobyl, those are technically monster stories. It's the same idea. It is something that is going to kill you if you don't figure out a way to contain it, to get yourself to be immune to it, whatever. I think that we're always going to come up with something that is going to seem horrific. But as for a monster that we can look at and say that's scary, that's always going to be a really tough sell. Do you remember the movie The Ring? Okay, so when that came out, I went and saw that with my sister and my cousin and another friend. It was a midnight showing, and I was driving, so I drove us home, and we were so terrified coming home from that movie because it was so scary to us. We couldn't sleep. We all laid down in our beds, eyes shut, not moving, but nobody slept a single minute that night. And we talked about it the next day and like how terrified we were. I saw it recently and was watching some of the scenes that really shocked and horrified me, and they were not scary anymore. The most disturbing thing in that entire video is, or in that entire movie, is in the videotape itself. There's some images that are slightly off looking. They don't seem quite right. And that is more scary to me than seeing a girl climbing out of the TV, or, somebody who's been supposedly frightened to death and their face is all deformed. Those things are not scary. There's got to be a subtlety, I think, to how you do it. There are some directors out there who understand this and don't try to show you the monster. They want you to know that it's so scary that you can't even imagine it, but they're going to show you the effects of the fear.
And I think that, we can talk about the different creators of horror and fear. I am a big fan of Clark Ashton Smith, who was one of the big 3 weird horror writers in the Lovecraft circle, along with H.P. Lovecraft himself. And I was on recently a Clark Ashton Smith podcast. And then I'm also going to bring in, going back to Sigourney Weaver. Again, my fan theory is this is the same universe as Cabin in the Woods. In Cabin in the Woods, Joss Whedon was, I think, saying, I'm going to throw every monster in existence at you and then destroy the world. We're going to end the genre. This is the last film that'll ever be done in the teenagers go into the woods monster genre. This is a genre, and I don't think he meant physically, nobody can make monster movies after this, but it was a statement there. And Clark Ashton Smith was sort of famous for, like Lovecraft, creating these monsters which were sort of vague physically, but the fear was existential and primordial. that like in Lovecraft, you know, the whole thing about the elder gods is that they're not out to get you personally because you are so insignificant.
But you might get in the way of their path.
The universe is going to end, and so you'll die, but screaming. But it's more the giganticness of this horror rather than the personal, like, guy with a mask chasing the individual young woman or young man with a knife. And I think so. In the dimensions of horror, I guess there's the mystery monster, like we don't see it as sharply. And this film immediately wanted to show us every monster right on the screen. There was no mystery.
There was no mystery.
It's just there.
And yet they tried to pretend that there was a mystery starting halfway through.
But of course they found, as you do, I do in my daily life, you find a tape, a movie that gives you all the exposition you want just right there from a dead scientist. Which reminded me a lot. And John Carpenter did it in The Thing, but I think he did it a lot better in The Thing of like finding, the tapes of the people who'd been killed by the monster before. I worry that not only have we run out of ideas, but like we've run out of people who want to find a new idea. That like they're just, especially since this movie is like the most profitable movie Apple is ever going to make, apparently, or has made. The standard is not going to be really high for like, let's do something different and like surprise people.
Well, I don't think that there's a lack of people wanting to find something new, but this could be true of people who are in power in certain studios, including Apple, which has got some really great shows. I don't know if you've seen Severance, but that's got to be the most unique show that I've seen in a long time, and I am just in love with it. But I think that so. I am in contact with an executive over at Netflix, and this person is giving me kind of the spiel of why do we see so many of the same kinds of poor choices in storytelling being made, and it rings very true what I've been told, and that is that there are businessmen and women who are in these top executive positions, and they are giving orders to the showrunners and the writers and the producers, the people who are actually making the movies, and they're telling them, you're going to do this. And they're going, that's a terrible idea. And they're saying, I don't care. I don't like it. Like, do this. Like, do what I'm telling you to do. But they have no background in storytelling of any kind, whether it's writing, film, whatever. So they don't even understand that what they're doing is a poor choice. And it's a struggle. And I think was it to you? I sent somebody a link recently of Christopher Reeves. Is it Reeves or Reeve? Who played Superman, back in the 70s. And he did an interview where he said the same thing. He said, I think it's
that's a famous interview. I remember.
Yeah, he said it's very frustrating because the people who are making the decisions about what's going to make it into a movie or a show have no expertise or experience even in storytelling, creating a story and understanding why things have to be done in certain ways in order for them to work. And they're just doing what they like or what they think will sell, but it has nothing to do with the story itself. And that's why we're seeing so much garbage coming out.
Can I disagree?
Oh, go ahead.
Or like disagree. And I sometimes I disagree just to like posit an alternative universe. Like, I'm going to go back to this book that I really recommend for people who want to learn about the old Hollywood system. It's Thomas Schatz. He wrote a book called The Genius of the System. And the people who made movies in, say, the 1910s through the 1950s, the people in power, the studio bosses of legend, they wanted to make money. They wanted to make a profit. There's nobody has been in charge in Hollywood who didn't want to make money. But they loved movies. They really loved movies. They took a real pride that they weren't making gloves and cars, they were making movies. So I read this interesting interview with Brandon Sanderson, who is not, I mean, I'm not a Brandon Sanderson fan in the sense that I don't particularly care for his work, but I think he seems like a really nice guy and he's always good to fans and he's certainly super successful. He wrote the last 2 volumes of The Wheel of Time?
Yeah, I think it was more than 2, but nobody can deny that he's not very successful and seems to know what he's doing.
Yeah, so he said something really interesting. And I thought, since he's such a nice guy, it's so odd that not odd, but like, I'm going to pay attention when I wasn't quite not so nice, but he said that he was in a meeting in Hollywood and he realized a lot of the people that he were talking to on the talent side were people who had hoped to write their own fantasy epics and failed. And so they really looked forward to making their imprint on somebody else's fantasy epic.
I have heard that.
I don't necessarily, when I hear like, oh man, I'm a talented artist and it's these businessmen who are crushing my artistic, maybe you're just not talented. I'm not you. Like maybe there's a lot of untalented people and a lot of business people, but I'm not seeing the evidence that when the artists are set free, that they necessarily produce better art. And I'm sorry, I'm going to get, again, referential here. There's one of the best books on art I've ever written was by Chuck Jones. Chuck Jones was the director and the creator of a lot of the Warner Brothers cartoons of fame. He invented Daffy Duck. I have one of his cells in my house. An amazing guy, and he wrote this book, Chuck-a-Muck, about his life in Hollywood, creating these unbelievable, fantastic Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig cartoons. And he talked about how crushing the system was. Like every cartoon had to be 6 minutes. You had a rule of like 300 things you couldn't put in the cartoon. And he said he wasn't happy at being crushed by the business people, but he liked that they were able to create art within hard walls. And I am unconvinced that Hollywood is full of these amazing artists that if these evil businessmen would just let them create their art, it would actually be any better than what they're seeing.
No, I don't disagree with that either. But what I'm saying is, because I've definitely seen evidence of that. I think we're getting that in Wheel of Time right now. In Wheel of Time, we are getting such a butchered adaptation. It is absolutely nothing like what the books are like. It takes a few plot points and has the similar names, but the characters are all different. They are completely forgetting what the main point of some of these stories are. They've kind of dropped the themes that were there. But because we do see that there is excellent talent. That is definitely evident, what you were talking about. People wanting to write their own fantasy, so they take somebody else's IP and produce that and put their mark on it. Like, I did with it what I wanted to do. It was good because it was my thing. But I do think that there's a lot of talent in Hollywood, and people don't get to positions like this. Think about what we got with Dune. Dune had all the potential to just absolutely fall apart as a horrible adaptation. Yes, it took a lot of liberties. It took a lot of cutting of the original Dune novels, but it was a great movie, a great 2-part movie. You had somebody who was in charge of this project and said, I am not going to be dictated to what I can or cannot do to create a quality film. But I think that there are a lot of studios right now producing show after show after show on their own, like as a studio production. And you're getting the executives who are stopping real talented people from telling them when they're about to do something wrong. Like, you're about to make a very big mistake, and they're stopping that from happening. I've been getting a lot of stories. I can't really share them because it'll expose who my friend is, but the stories being, we tried to do this and we were told no. And then what do you know? The show comes out and people are criticizing what happened, and all you can say is, you see, but nobody cares in the higher ups because whatever I can do to keep my position, to stay safe where I am, eventually I think it's going to catch up. But But I do think there's a lot of talent.
Ask though about that.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not like, in no way am I disagreeing. I mean, I'll take his word for it. I'll certainly take your view of it. But I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think it's ever been in human history as clear as artists good, patrons bad. And in the history of art, and another book I'd recommend on this, there's a wonderful book by a guy by Michael Baxendale, Painting and Experience in Quattrocento, Italy. I don't think that's the exact title. But anyway, he did something really brilliant. He's an art historian. This became a classic book. Is he went back and he looked at the contracts of the great artists. Like somebody's painting the Mona Lisa, right? Well, that person didn't just on spec create Mona Lisa. There was a contract between a patron. That's the way art worked back then. The Pope or a rich merchant said, paint my wife or paint the chapel. And there was a contract. And what he found was those contracts were incredibly onerous. They were really detailed. Like, I want my wife to have 3 pounds of gold leaf in her cheeks or something like that. The point was that we have this stereotype of like artistic freedom good, control from the money people bad, but 99% of the great art we saw before the 20th century was highly controlled by power and money. And they still, we remember it because it's the best of the art. We don't remember the bad art, right? But I never want to just wholesale accept that if artists in Hollywood or in, a grotto in Soho are released to do their thing.
No, I don't believe that either.
Create great art.
I certainly don't believe that either. But I do think that it's rampant in a lot of the studios at the moment.
Well, can I just ask you on that one point, though? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
I've gone so far from the Gorge.
I know. That's okay. We're going to have to retitle this video.
It's something I've always wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
So you're a studio and you buy an IP like The Wheel of Time or Lord of the Rings or whatever, and it made a lot of money. I mean, let's forget about whether it was art or not. Like, it made a heck of a lot of money in its original form. Wouldn't the grasping studio head order the flunky artist to say, now look, this thing made a lot of money, so I want a faithful adaptation, just do what made a lot of money?
But they don't.
Why would the money people change the IP that made a lot of money in its original version? What's their motivation to change things?
It's because of what they're told is popular now. So let's say you have an IP that came out 20 years ago, which would be, I think, didn't Avatar come out 20 years ago? I don't know. It's been a while. But you will get people who are in these executive positions and say, oh, this was great. People loved it. We're going to do a modern adaptation of it. But they're going to adapt it to what they believe is the current audience. And there's a misunderstanding, I think, of what people will accept in a story. I think the story is so immersive, no matter what story it is, if it's done well, it is its own little universe. You very rarely want to see changes made to specific things like the world building, the characters, the plot progression, themes, and tones. You want those things to be the same in an adaptation. But exactly what you said just now, why would somebody who's after the money take an IP and say, let's change it when they want it to make more money again? They are the ones saying, change it. I don't know why they believe that if we change it, it's going to make more money. And all it does is make people angry who loved the original material. And then that spreads a bad reputation. But those are the stories that have been relayed to me specifically, is that they are told, you will change this. I don't know if it's the same with every single studio, but what I'm getting is from somebody who's in the business and talks to people in other studios and understands how it works and says, it's like that. You've got people who they want to keep their job. They consider themselves to be, I have reached the top, so what I believe and think and feel is going to be right. And there's this belief that we have to make sure that we adapt things to the audience here. We have to change things. But people who understand storytelling, and there are many of them who are making wonderful movies and TV shows, are in this battle with people who are in higher positions of power telling them, no, you are going to change this. And they're trying to explain why you can't do it. But there's a gut reaction from these higher ups saying, I don't like that. Some of the stories that were relayed to me were about comedy shows that were huge hits that were passed up because the person who at the studio is in charge of picking comedy did not understand the humor. But they passed it off to another studio, and that studio picked it up, and it became a huge hit because they just happened to have that executive who got the humor and produced it. But the one that it passed by before did not understand did not understand writing, did not understand genre, did not understand.
I really want to emphasize what you're saying, how right it is.
Yeah.
But it's always been right. I mean, the example, I have this discussion with my students a lot about, like, can you actually test a premise for a movie or a TV show and really understand whether it'll be successful or not? I mean, we love to impose science on something that's artistic, and here's a great example. Is I'm old enough to like, if somebody said when I was 20 years old, hey, we're going to start this new coffee place, and you're going to pay the equivalent of, to yesterday's dollars, $10 for a Frappuccino latte, pumpkin spiced latte, and you'll pay $10 for a cup of coffee. I think the testing would have said, no, who's going to pay that much money? I mean, there's a lot of, Steve Jobs famously said, the audience doesn't know what they want until you do it, and they find that they love it. And I think this idea that if we just now maybe The Gorge is an example, and again, because it is a successful movie in the box office category, is one where they said, okay, we're going to check some boxes for different members of the audience, younger, skewing. I don't know. Did your mother like the whole movie, or just?
She liked the romance, and then she's like, then it became like, I don't know, monsters and like guns and shooting, and like it kind of became less interesting. She was more, but she said that the best part was the whole first half. She's like, I was totally sucked in. These two characters who I cared about were coming together, and that was interesting.
Yeah. So.
And my brother, who's really into action, and my brother has a professional expertise in military tactics and weaponry. Yeah. And he was bored with the movie once it became an action flick. He's like, it was really interesting. I was enjoying it, and then it became terrible. So I think there's something universal in the way this story is told, and it changed something up halfway through and became not what we were invested in anymore. Sorry, that was a little sidetracking. I go on tangents.
No, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. My takeaway is that it's very difficult to make something for everybody. And you can't it when you do. Yeah. Right? And I mean, Starbucks is successful because you can go there and you can order a really specialized coffee that maybe nobody in the world has ever made that combination before, and they'll do it for you. Unless we talk about AI, and I joked with my students that this is the first AI movie, full Hollywood movie.
I do want to ask you about that.
I think AI made this movie, but like all the choices felt like the average of every choice. Okay. The corporation will be an evil corporation, and it will have Sigourney Weaver because the AI says that Sigourney Weaver is the best evil director of a corporation or something like that. But I guess I feel for the executives in some way, because like to get a massive audience today, you really have to appeal to people who are more. The generation of students that we're serving in college, the Generation Z and the Alpha generation, which are coming up, they are the curation authenticity generation. They don't want a generalized product made for everybody.
Yeah.
They want something, they've lived their whole life with their phone with everything tailored for their exact want and need. And so I think it's going to be increasingly challenging, and you can see that in the box office issues of MCU movies, for example, that like maybe the general audience movie is dead. And maybe we
I don't
have
think
to
it
make
ever
smaller films for smaller audiences.
I don't think that the general audience ever really existed, because people like what they like and don't like what they don't like. There were fewer choices in the past. There's a movie released every day now. A huge movie every day gets released. And I can't keep up with it. I can't go and see a million movies. I'm going to wait until somebody says, I saw this movie and it was spectacular. You should go and see it. I rarely go see movies in a theater anymore anyway. But the thing is when you try to make a product for everybody, it ends up disappointing everybody as well, because it's not what you wanted. And, if we're talking just about this movie itself, I think what I'm trying to grasp about it is, why did they spend so much time building up a relationship story? They literally spent the first half of the movie on these two characters. Show us their backstory, talk about their trauma, show them with their family, how horrible their life is and what they're going to be suffering. And then we're going to put them in the same room together, basically, and tell them they're not allowed to talk to each other. They're going to talk to each other and they're going to have an interesting conversation. That was the number one focus of the entire plot, until halfway through, the guy falls in the gorge and suddenly it's an action movie. All the little action stuff that happened before that was secondary to the plot, but then it suddenly became the main plot. This was a sloppy choice with inconsistency within the plot itself. It was two totally different types of films, maybe many types of films, but two very, very different types focused on for significant chunks of the story. If you wanted to turn this into an action mystery science fiction sort of story, you've got to bring more of that into the beginning of your story. You have to make that more of a focus. So what you're talking about with an audience, there's no general audience sort of story anymore. It feels sloppy when you try to stick in so much stuff that doesn't belong in the story. You don't add so much stuff in your story. Keep it simple. Have you?
Well, I think that the viewing experience maybe has changed too, right? Because we talk about, like, are there movies anymore? Was this a movie? I mean, I saw it on my screen at home. Is it a television show? These categories, which used to be really solid categories when I was a college student, of like, let's go to the movies. And by the way, that's interesting. Like, we used to go to the movies. Maybe I need to explain this to parts of your audience. It's like, we used to physically walk or go in a car to a place where people gathered together without any phones or a second screen or a third screen to watch a movie. Now, if you go back into the 40s, people went Friday night, Saturday night to the movies, and there'd be like two movies, an A feature and a B feature, and there'd be cartoons and news. And I think that compromise was part of human relationships then. Again, there would be an action movie, and part of the audience was there for the action movie, but the Hollywood filmmakers said, like, okay, we got to have a romance in there. And people sort of put up with not every element in the whole movie being what they love. The viewing experience now is so personalized and curated. I mean, I think a lot of people watch movies alone, or somebody walks out for 20 minutes and says, tell me when the shooting's over, I'll come back, right? Nobody would do that in 1985, I can tell you that. So I think my takeaway for The Gorge, to wrap up from my end, is that this is a very successful movie that certainly has a lot of problems plot-wise. Again, I apologize to the people of Lithuania deeply and truly. Sorry. This is going to be the only Lithuania apology video that you'll ever have.
They probably don't care. They're probably like, whatever, it wasn't a great movie.
I'd like to see the box office numbers there. But anyway, I feel that this tells us a lot about movies today, that this is so successful.
Yeah, but what is it telling us exactly?
I guess you can get a formula where you have a checkbox for
And it can work.
20 different audiences, and it works in the sense of, well, let's go back, you're telling me about the Hollywood executives, they want to make money. Well, okay. This has made more money than any movie ever for Apple, apparently.
Yeah,
So,
that's
there
true.
you go.
I mean, you can't ignore the numbers, but how many people are coming away from this movie? I'd love to see exit polls on this movie. I want to see what people think of it coming out of it. Like, was it as great? What were some of the things that you were disappointed in? What are some of the things that you were really surprised by or excited by? I would be interested to see that from everybody who watched it. To me, watching this, it was so unmemorable. I wasn't so enraged by it because it wasn't horrific, but it wasn't spectacular. I came out of it feeling like, whatever. It was a movie. It entertained me for 2 hours, but I'll probably never watch it again. I didn't find it interesting enough to see a second time. When you get online, there are going to be people who either loved it or hated it. So those are the people you're hearing from the most. This was not bad enough to loathe to the extent that something like Wheel of Time deserves some loathing. Because fortunately for this movie, it is not an adaptation, so that helps. But it wasn't so terrible that it's something you can literally tear to shreds every single line, although I could, but because I'm a stickler for that sort of thing. But I'm not going to, because I didn't hate it so bad that I'm willing to put the energy into that. So I think that the most of the people you're going to be hearing from are people who really enjoyed it and loved it. Remember that the internet is not a representation of the people. It is the people who are the loudest. So it's the people who loved it the most or hated it the most. And I don't think this was worthy of extreme hate, but there are going to be people who just adored it.
And when the Gorge 2 comes out, we can
Oh my
cover
gosh.
that.
Yeah, I guess suppose we could.
Super Gorge. Sharknado Gorge.
Did you have any technical notes that you wanted to go over? So you had a lot of notes that you sent me, and it's funny because this was supposed to be a joint critique of this movie, and it ended up becoming a discussion on storytelling and filmmaking, which is fine with me. I'm going to rename the thumbnail for sure. But there were so many little points that I can look at and say this was inconsistent. This was very much exposition. This was somebody in the writing room saying, well, we have to close this loophole, so they threw a line in there. But in the end, I don't hate these choices so much because I didn't enjoy the movie all that much. It was a little disappointing that we didn't get to see this romance happen, but whatever. I mean, they did what they did and then they moved on, I guess.
Well, my students pointed out, and also a family member pointed out, that there was an original IP, and it was the Taylor Swift video "You Belong to Me." So I'm in with the kids, so I rarely recommend Sword and Pen to watch the Taylor Swift video "You Belong."
I will take a look at it, and I will put up a clip. Right?
You Belong to Me with Monsters and Guns.
You Belong to Me with Monsters and Guns. All right.
That was the Hollywood pitch. You got to have an elevator pitch, and so somebody was an elevator and said to the studio guys and ladies, Taylor Swift, You Belong to Me with Monsters, Evil Dead, and Guns.
And we'll even add Sigourney Weaver to give it some legitimacy.
Yeah. That's right.
Nice. I love it.
That's how movies get made in this town.
I think it probably is. Oh, my goodness. So I'm not going to include this in the bit of recording. Are you wanting to wrap up now? I think I've scheduled us for like another 40 minutes, but we don't have to go that long.
Wow, that's a long time. I mean, whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do.
Yeah, well, go through your notes. I want to make sure you get to say everything that you wanted to say.
I guess, really, first of all, I am really deeply honored. This has been a fantastic conversation. You get an A+ for the No, I really enjoyed it. I just want to say that. Some of the technical stuff, again, it's a question is like, for the kind of film, it's like saying that, the Fast and Furious 7 just didn't compare to Sir Alec Guinness and Macbeth.
Yeah.
Is it fair to critique these movies for having these, like, would they have really used this right? I did want to mention and I want to hear like your critique of the weapons.
Yeah.
Because this
ahead.
reference to The Office, I thought was cute.
Oh yeah, I'll play a clip of that right now.
At the Stanford branch, they all play this World War II video game called Call of Duty, and they're all really into it. Unfortunately, I really suck at it. Oh, we didn't play many video games in Scranton.
Call of Duty.
Andy, Jim, can I see you in the conference room for a minute?
Now?
Yes, now. We're getting slaughtered out there.
It's the new guy.
All right, Jim, are you using the MP40 or the 44? Sniper rifle? Snipe what? Jim,
Are you playing for the other team?
You don't snipe in Carrington, okay?
The saboteur!
But yeah, so you sent me that clip telling me that that this critique applies to this movie as well. And I do have a counter argument to this. So my brother does have an expertise in weaponry, and I know enough about weapons that I looked at these and from the clip that you sent me where you've got the two characters down in the gorge, and what they're using are intermediate assault rifles. So you would use these down in the situation you're at. These are not sniper rifles. A sniper rifle is like 15 pounds, super long. You're going to have to carry that thing, set it up on a tripod. You're probably going to need a spotter. But to make sniper-like shots with an assault rifle across the gorge, that's not possible. And we saw that happen several times in the movie where you've got, it was, what's her face? Drasa. She's got her, I think she was using an AKM, which is just it's an assault rifle. The accuracy is not going to stretch beyond 800 yards. And that's what we were looking at here. There's no way she could make that shot.
A little bit more like, and maybe this is I mean, one of my books was on the history of the visualization of warfare. I'm sort of a military history geek, and that's what I write sometimes. And so I really wanted a little bit more, like, remember that scene in Aliens where Sigourney Weaver says, "Teach me how to use this rifle." And we get like 30 seconds of like how to use the Marine assault weapon. And like, it's got, this is how you tell, and it actually becomes important in the plot later, including the fact Sigourney Weaver, uses it, right? So I felt like, going back to what you said in my notes, I said, okay, it's Hollywood. So like, yeah, in real life, there's a sniper team and there's the spotter who, by the way, alternates with the sniper. They're both snipers. That it's just who takes the shot or not. Somebody has to do the math. Somebody has to do the situation awareness. You're not going to get somebody doing these gigantic, amazing shots without somebody else. But okay, let's put that aside. I guess I wanted one scene where they open a cabinet, and remember, they're supposed to be there a year, right? Mm-hmm. And they're supposed to face many different situations. I guess the geek in me wanted one scene where they open a cabinet and there's like 50 different types of weapon that they can use in any situation.
There were a couple times where you could see weapons hanging on the wall I think in her tower. But the thing is, what you're bringing up makes me think a lot of like, there was an expectation going in that this was going to be an interesting science fiction military sort of flick, but it didn't start out that way. It didn't become that until halfway through. So things like that weren't really paid attention to. Like, I wanted to know, they were told, there's plenty of game, and look, there's a garden here, so you can supply your own food. And I'm going, can you grow food in the winter? Do they know if these people know how to do canning? Like, can they can their own food? Like, those were things I wanted to see.
Where they open like a cabinet, and it's like the end of Indiana Jones, where there's this gigantic stock room of like 5 million cans of soup.
Just something like that. Yeah. But then it very quickly revealed itself, this is not a science fiction horror story. This is a romance. So all of my expectations were kind of like, oh, okay, I'm not supposed to expect that sort of thing. So I let go of those things. There were still things that bothered me, but it went with the reveal at the end that Dark Lake is in charge of everything. For instance, okay, the tripwires that they have, the laser tripwires, right? Yeah. Okay. So how come the gun's on his side when the laser tripwire goes off on his side? All the guns that are automated, remember, he's not aiming and telling them what to do. They're shooting across to the other side. Why are his guns shooting to defend her side and her guns are shooting to defend his side when they're supposed to be separate and independent, they're not working together. And it's like, okay, then you got Dark Lake or whatever. And then, okay, that makes sense, I guess, you know, that for some reason they're told that they're not working together, even though it would have taken is none of my turret guns can aim straight down and hit guys that are trying to climb straight up. They're aiming across. You can even see the tracer fire during that night fight, which looked cool, shooting across to the end. I was like, why are his guns defending her side? He didn't tell them to do that. They do that automatically. So why? Does her tripwire alert his guns? Is that how it works? I made no sense.
Yeah,
but it doesn't bug me so much when the focus is the fantasy, because then I'm like, it looks cool, or not the fantasy, the romance. It looks cool, and these characters are in romance. Like, whatever. It was not good enough for me to pick that stuff apart, you know?
Well, this is where an audience enters, the modern audience, the general audience, whatever we're calling them. The audience, the studio wants to attract large numbers of people. Okay, fine. But when you lure people in thinking that they're going to get the movie they want to see, like I was honestly less interested in the romance, and I sort of wanted to see aliens. Okay, maybe your brother and I can watch movies together. And
the thing is, I love action movies too. That would have been something to draw me in over a romance for sure. I won't go see a romance. I'll go see an action movie. But some
of the technology, I felt that they referred to technology, but then didn't follow up.
Or they didn't use it to its potential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that whole, they spent an inordinate time talking about how far their shots went to get the greatest shot in the world. Like somebody in Yemen was assassinated by it turns out to be, surprise, one of them did it.
Yeah.
I will give away that mystery, but like it's the longest shot in the world. Okay, that's fine, and there's no way that one person would have just done that on their own without being a team. But like if they want to get technical sometimes, but then they turn it off other times. That's where I just don't like when they
I don't like that either. Yeah,
they make it. I don't know. It's hard to cheer for them.
It's inconsistency. Yeah, but yeah, It's definitely a disappointment when you come in expecting one kind of film and then you get something else. But when it's revealed itself, they show them the fortress. Like all this background stuff could have easily just been, it's difficult for me to do my job. And then you put them in their scenario. But then it became, all that background stuff was going to amplify the relationship potential between these two, because they both have trauma, they both have things they're dealing with, they both feel guilty sometimes about the kills that they make, and that's going to help them bond. At that point, it became obvious to me that all the backstory we got wasn't about their technical expertise and how it's going to challenge their ability to do their job. It was about building up how these two people are going to connect. And I was like, okay, so this is a romance. There's a scene where I think it was him, he's got an EOTech scope, which has no magnification on it. It's just a little red dot. And he looks through it, and all of a sudden, it's total magnification. Like, there's so much in this that they just did it because, they needed it for plot convenience. They got away with a lot, but they also tried to excuse a lot and, come up with a way to close the loopholes. So it's disappointing when you go in thinking this is going to be a fun sci-fi monster war military sort of story, and then it becomes a romance. But once it becomes that romance, everything else is kind of, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. The main focus of this first half of the story was romance. The second half was, we're a mystery military science fiction, also fantasy.
Okay, let's talk romance for a moment.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
We can wrap up with romance. There is that the one, and again, I almost feel guilty critiquing stuff like this, but she tells him, I have a secret place in France. I'm going to quit the sniper business. I'm going to quit being an assassin for the Russian government apparently, and I'm going to go to France. Now that's the only clue that he has to go on, right? And
it's the only clue we saw. So we did see, I have a count. Go ahead. Keep going.
Well, okay. I heard, maybe I missed something, but I heard.
No, you didn't.
She goes to France.
Yes.
She will intend to go. They get separated. She thinks he's dead. She goes to France. And by the way, she does not go to like
the Eiffel Tower
in Paris.
Yeah,
the
she
Eiffel
doesn't.
Tower at midnight on Valentine's Day, like a real romance movie would be. I actually thought they could have done that. They could have said, like, look, if any of us survive, be on the top stage of the Eiffel Tower
on this day,
Valentine's Day, a year from now or something like that. Okay. And I'm thinking, now, wait a minute. You just blew up with, first of all, people notice nuclear weapons going off. Like that's detectable. So every government in the world, every news agency, every secret service, everybody knows about what's going on now. The evil corporation wasn't just one person and three hench people. So like you've got the Russian FSB and the French DGSE and the CIA and the NSA are all looking for you. Every news organization is looking for you. So of course she doesn't change her, her hair.
I had a problem with that, but okay.
And she's just waiting tables at this little seaside bistro in France. And then he finds her.
When you're going in looking for that science fiction mystery monster adventure, you do expect these things to be done well. Now, but I can excuse that because they also coordinated how they were going to take out Dark Lake. So we didn't see a lot of their conversation. We did because they don't just sit there and say, you go and do this and I'll go and do this. Remember, they're both laying that fuse between the cloaking satellites. Yeah. So they obviously had a moment where they planned what they're going to do and how they're both going to escape and quarantine for 5 days. And then they're going to meet up in France. Like none of that was on screen. So I was able to forgive. Maybe she told him specifically where they would be, but I did think it was awfully stupid of her not to cut and dye her hair like you do in the Bourne Identity, right? Like the end of the Bourne Identity. This is the Bourne Identity ending. It's the same ending, but she cut her hair and dyed it. Like she did not look like, it was easy. It was harder to see that she was the same person. So whatever. But yeah, the thing is that this movie was not a military science fiction thriller. It was a romance and a military science fiction thriller, and it was a fantasy. They didn't care about the science fiction stuff of it. That was the least amount of care was put into making this a believable hard science sort of world. So, you've got monsters who are acting animalistic, but they can barbecue you. They're like, I'm going to barbecue you before I consume you. Also, how did he know that the bad guy was emaciated? At one point, he said, I don't know, based on how emaciated the bad guy is, I'd say they're after us to eat us. And I'm like, how could you tell if it was emaciated? I couldn't tell. It looked like a fit vine person. Like it didn't look emaciated, but apparently he was able to tell. Like they did not care about the science fiction element of this. That's why this was definitely like, that was secondary, except that they devoted as much time to this science fiction thriller mystery as they did to their romance. It's a very unbalanced story. Very unbalanced.
Yeah, there were so many suspensions of disbelief that I lost count.
Yeah. I took note of all of them, but I barely care about any of them. I remember them, but I don't care. Like, who cares?
But again, maybe just, teaching in a college, I've learned a long time ago and I guess this is sort of my theory of this, is that I have no problem people liking and appreciating stuff that I despise or think not much of, because the one point where I will get into an argument and shake my cane at somebody on the internet, and I've actually done this. I had an argument on the internet about The Gorge, but the person was saying The Gorge is the greatest movie ever made. I can't wait for The Gorge 2. And I made the mistake, and you should never do this, as I said, like, what did you like about it? And he said, well, what wasn't to like about it? And I said, well, these 25 things. And he said, well, you have no idea what you're talking about. You're just making stuff up. And like, what? And then I just stopped contact at that point because this person wasn't willing to engage like we are here, like point for point or something like that. They just liked something, and that's fine.
It's
that's
totally fine, yeah.
But I just wish they had more people in the writer's room and the editing room going like, maybe we should just cut, maybe we should have another plot point here, or maybe we should just add a little bit of realism. But who do I know? I mean, I didn't make this $80 million in movie, and I didn't make the huge profit from this $80 million. I'm just a guy on the internet. So,
you know, I say it all the time on in my comments, especially in my videos of Wheel of Time reviews, that you're totally allowed to enjoy garbage. I enjoy garbage too. I really do. There are plenty of movies and shows that I know are not good, but I love them. But I think that there's certain things that are easy to dispute or easy to critique as objectively as possible and say this was inconsistent. And for somebody to take offense to that, it's all coming from, you're telling me I'm stupid. I'm saying, no, I'm not. I think that you liking this is fine. And that's hard to convey to people, that it's okay to like something that is not perfect. It's okay to like something that's not good. I like, okay, one of the worst movies, Universal Soldier. I love that movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme. It is the cheesiest movie you've ever seen, but I still love it. It's totally okay to love something that's not good. I think that
I'm leaving now.
You're
That's
leaving?
it. No. I completely understand what you're saying, and I completely agree.
But people,
and I think it's a terrible problem. I mean, let's not get into the world of politics, but we have this terrible situation now where we're not allowed to disagree on anything without going immediately to
you're offending me.
With me, you must be evil.
Yeah,
like,
or
there's no other choice. Like we couldn't just disagree about something, and let's keep popular culture in the realm of like, it's okay to disagree.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean the other person is even wrong. It just means we have a disagreement. But I'm only going to give you an A+ in the class if you back up your disagreement with actual facts from the movie and actual observations. You can't just say, I love this movie, but not tell me what you loved about the movie. I hate the movie.
I think that's got to be tough for young people who grew up with access to the internet, and they're seeing critiques. They're seeing people get online and tear movies to shreds and saying, I don't like this. And they're like, oh yeah, I agree with that. But to present evidence to back up your argument, there are very few critics who I see put in the time to do that. Actually, I'm sure there's tons out there, but as far as the critics that I'm aware of, very few of them will actually say, you see, look at this, it doesn't make sense. Here's all the evidence that I have for it. Or this was poor quality and let me explain why. They'll usually just say it was bad quality, this was inconsistent, the acting was bad. And I'm like, give me examples. It's got to be tough for young people to realize that not giving concrete examples is not going to fly in a university level class. And probably it wouldn't have flown in my high school. Like, you had to provide concrete evidence to back your arguments up when you were doing persuasive essay writing, or even just a research paper where you throw in an opinion at the end sneakily. I see why people struggle with it, but you have to be able to, once you can make that separation, I feel like people are open to the idea of, yeah, okay, maybe I have to separate my feelings from this. Nothing's perfect. There's no movie out there, no book out there that is absolutely perfect. Somebody will always find something. Okay, let's hear. What do you think is perfect?
I don't know. I've in my lifetime, I've seen some movies which I had no negative critique of, that I thought were perfect, and I've read books that I thought were, that I would, I mean,
do you have some concrete examples?
I wouldn't change anything. Everything was effective. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I was interrupting you to say, do you have some concrete examples?
Yeah, I mean, and these seem like an odd group of examples. I thought the movie Lawrence of Arabia was a perfect movie. I have no suggestion. I have no notes to send David Lean posthumously on what to change in that movie.
I would say it was damn good. Because I'm a big fan of Lawrence of Arabia as well. But I bet I could find something in there to complain about.
And maybe, maybe the statement, I tell you, like we go to the fact that like in fantasy and science fiction, there's always going to be suspension of disbelief. Like, for example, in Star Wars, yeah, it bothers me that like they just go into any ship, the tiny little ship can go into light speed and go a billion miles or something. Yeah, it sort of bothers me, but okay, let's get past that and then get to something else, right? But what we talked about in this film is that suspension of disbelief, the bridge of suspension collapses when you put too much weight on it, or maybe too many individual weights. And this film, for me, just kept putting these 500 tampon boulders on the suspension of disbelief, and finally it collapsed pretty early for me, but it just collapsed, right? Whereas other movies, the suspension, I was happy to just keep going through that because so much else was so terrific there. And I do believe that there are short stories, novels, television shows, The Wire, I would put up there, Babylon 5, a number of other, I, Claudius, I'm going through my greatest hits list where I guess I wouldn't say that they were all perfect, but they were so good, especially the writing. And for me, the writing has to be good. Maybe other people have like color photography and like sound design and like acting has to me, the writing is the marble foundation that everything else has to be. And if you don't have good writing, everything else. So let's just end the saying that you can get close to perfection.
I do agree that writing is where you're going to see if there are problems in the writing, then it's going to spread to everything else, or it's going to stand out. You have a weak story, that's terrible. But if it's solid writing, I still think you can find little mistakes here and there. I do think that it's possible to find them even in the greats like Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia. You're going to find little imperfections, but do they matter? When the rest of it, when 99.99999% of this film is perfect, does it matter? No, it does not. No human being is perfect. No work of art is perfect. No movie is going to be perfect. There's always something that could have been done a little more concisely, a little more perfectly. But it doesn't matter if it was so good that you don't even notice the mistakes if there are any. Do you know? I guess if I say if there are any at the end of that statement, it kind of negates everything that I just said. But the few that there will be, because you're going to find something like somebody will have stepped into the line of the camera, or you're going to see tire tracks through the desert. Actually, I think that is one of the things you can at one point see tire tracks through across the desert in Lawrence of Arabia. But they put so much effort into raking the entire desert between every take that if I'm like, oh, I could see they raked right there, does that really matter? No, but it is an imperfection technically. So when I talk about an imperfection, I mean that, nothing is going to be perfect. I think we should not take offense when you can find something, because nothing is going to be perfect anyway, even the greats.
Yeah, and I think we can say that for The Gorge, I admire, and I'm going to use the word admire, their attempt to do an original IP, because of what one of the critiques of Hollywood is all they can do is necromance. All they can do is try to raise the dead and do it badly. Sort of like Frankenstein's monster, right?
Yeah.
Create life, but like not something that you'd want to hang out with or engage over 15 seasons on HBO. So they did create something original. It is derivative in being original, and that, like, I don't think there's an original idea in the whole movie. But hey, it's a new movie, it's a new property. They did some things. I want to go back to like amazing soundtrack, amazing audio design, beautiful cinematography. Just check like 19 things out of the 32 things that a movie should be to be successful, effective. I wish that they'd had some more thought about the plot. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And we'll move on to an obscure French drama, that nobody's watched instead.
Or I can go and watch Universal Soldier.
That's right. How many times have you
Big
watched
winner.
it?
Oh, I just recently watched it for the first time in like a decade.
Oh, okay.
But I do love the movie. I don't know why. It's just it's so bad. It's the worst movie, but I just love it. I don't know why. Yeah, I think that this movie definitely had some good things in it, and it is a shame that it didn't do its monster military mystery thriller bit better, because it would have been a very unique film to have this romance. But I think that the way it was formatted, it would require such a huge overhaul in how this story was constructed in order for it to get rid of those flaws. You wouldn't have the same story. So for me, I took this away as, would I recommend this to other people? Some people, I'd say, check it out. You'll really like the first half, I think, or maybe, skip the first half if they're not the type that enjoy those kinds of, movies. But my brother liked it. See, my brother would have been there for the military stuff, and he was like, yeah, that's not accurate, but he was into these two people that was well built up to. So it's a movie that I don't think is going to be for everyone, like you said, but it was all right. You can take it or leave it, basically.
Maybe, I don't know whether you can edit it in, but I realized that when we were talking about the monsters, I wanted to ask you whether, to me, one of the reasons I stopped watching, I think after the fourth episode, The Wheel of Time, was that I felt that the Trollocs?
Trollocs, yeah.
Trollocs, yeah.
They're the Minotaurs.
I've forgotten. Are they as derivative in the book as they are from like orcs and trolls in Tolkien?
They're basically the same, pretty much.
Yeah.
There's more interesting versions of them. You get bird-like ones and pig-like ones in the book, but we pretty much only saw minotaurs in the.
So they're like a universal monster that can be adapted to mythology.
Yeah.
So there's flying ones?
Okay. So the Wheel of Time,
species?
from what I understand, I have not looked up a whole lot in like why Robert Jordan wrote this story, but I've been told millions of times in the comments by diehard fans, he wrote this inspired by, but also as a response to The Lord of the Rings. So yes, the Minotaurs are orcs and Uruk-hai. That's what they are. So you watch the first season or read the first book, there are a lot of plot points that are almost mirror images of what you had in, especially the Fellowship of the Ring. So, but then he decided to take it in a different direction. Not that he was trying to write Lord of the Rings, he was inspired by it, but he said, I don't think it would happen this way. I think it would be like this.
Yeah, I read an interview with him where he specifically said, I wanted to do a quest where the people didn't want to go on the quest.
Yeah.
Which...
Frodo didn't want to go on the quest, but he did because he felt he had to. It was his obligation.
I don't know whether that actually came out in the book and again, I'm not a Robert Jordan fan or expert because like I gave up after 3 books.
I think one of the things he said was, because he does little interviews that are included in the audiobooks, and I'm audiobooking pretty much the whole thing because I don't have time to sit and do nothing but read. I'm audiobooking while I'm holding my niece or while I'm driving the car to run errands. Like that's how I consume books outside of the ones I...
Polar bear hunting, right? That's, I mean,
yes.
That's what we assume you do.
Well, I'm just so... I spend so much time reading for my job. I'm a developmental editor.
I'm audiobooks now myself.
Yeah. So, okay.
It's interesting.
One of the things that he seemed to say wanted to do is that when people are told they are the chosen one and they're given this incredible amount of power, he said he wanted to show that even the best of people will be very strongly tempted to use power for selfish reasons. Like there's always people hunting for power for themselves, which The Lord of the Rings did touch on, but in more of a mythological sort of way. He's trying to bring a bit more realism to it. To me, Robert Jordan would not be successful today.
I don't think he would. This podcast, but I really love this topic, and I've written a lot about this. I talk a lot about this, about what happens because my area, I don't know if you look like at my CV, is political communication. So I write about like how do you persuade people to do something. So for example, I've done work on ISIS and the videos of ISIS. ISIS has they're mostly militarily defeated, but they had the best marketing.
They did. It's funny. I was just talking about that the other day with somebody. I was saying ISIS really understood how to use propaganda better than anybody.
I have, it's on YouTube somewhere. I did a lecture on like the marketing campaign of ISIS. And I always tell my students, like, okay, if I'm trying to persuade you to use a new brand of toothpaste, maybe that's a 1 on the scale of like persuasion. But if I'm trying to persuade you to leave your family and come die with me in a foreign land, AKA a quest, that's 11. So I actually I've had classes where I say, okay, Gandalf versus ISIS in terms of persuade, because that's what happens in the quest, right? I mean, if I showed up to your house and said, well, Anya, we have to save the world and you need to go on a quest and you will need to abandon all your family and never see them again and probably die.
Yeah.
What would I need to do to persuade you to do that, right? So
you would first have to be somebody I trusted and admired.
A podcast on that topic. Yeah.
That would be great. Yeah, we could totally do that. I do want to do more. I want to do more stuff like this because it's easier for me. I don't have to do as much editing.
So if you want to wrap up now for this, but like,
okay.
Anyway, I've had fun.
Yeah.
And there's so many things you say in your Wheel of Time stuff. And again, I'm not a fan of Wheel of Time. So it's a lot that I'm watching you and with my family and going like, gosh, we're not fans of the IP, but like she's making so many interesting points that relate to other stuff that I care about and I talk to my students about all the time. So
thanks.
Big fan.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I a lot of my reviews are now tailored to people who aren't watching the show. Because I've been told again and again, I'm not watching the show anymore, but I love the books and I want to hear what they're doing in the show. So I basically just summarize every scene. And if the dialogue is super important, I'll really include that. And then I just dissect it.
Well, if you want to do one on quest narratives.
Okay, I like that. Because
we can go back to, the Man with 1,000 Faces. And I part of my work when I started out, there's the book, Vladimir Propf, The Morphology of the Folk Tale.
That's ringing a bell, but it's been so long since I've read instructionals. Sort of like the introductory book they have for like a folk literature class. Okay.
And he read every Russian folktale ever written and said there's only 17 of them. Like they all follow one of 17 patterns. Like the small village boy, a magic elf comes or a magician comes and takes. So
like
anyway,
an expansion of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Before him. Anyway, so let's wrap up this. But thank you again for your time.
All right. So, just final thoughts on this movie as a whole. What did you think?
Well, first, I want Hollywood to know that I am available for being a screenwriter for The Gorge 2. I've got some amazing ideas that is going to make this the Lawrence of Arabia of the next generation and appeal to every kind of audience. Let's just say, look, this is an example of a successful movie in a couple of ways. First, it's an original IP. Yes, most of the ideas are derivative and they're not really followed up and they're not as developed as maybe somebody like us might say. But hey, it was the biggest hit movie on Apple so far in history. Somebody liked it. Somebody liked the premise. Maybe it does say something hopeful that there is a thirst for new IP, that we don't necessarily have to necromance, properties that have existed for years. We might come up with a quote original unquote idea. So best wishes to The Gorge and anybody who enjoyed The Gorge. No harm, no foul. Let's talk about it. And I want to express my deep thanks. Again, you are just one of the top independent creators on YouTube and all other channels today. And I and my students appreciate you very much for your deep thoughts about culture, and just wonderful being here with you here today.
Well, gosh, thank you so much, Professor Perlmutter. That's very flattering, and I'm honored to have that recognition from a professor, especially somebody who's got your background. I liked this. I pretty much agree with everything that you just said. I liked this movie. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. It was unbalanced, and that's probably the biggest critique I can make of it, because of all my technical criticisms are dependent on this being a technical film, which it is not. So yeah, but again, thank you so much for reaching out to me and suggesting doing this, because I really needed somebody to give me that little shove, like, hey, you want to do a podcast? Because I should be doing these and I'm not. So thank you for suggesting it and being willing to follow through with it and go through this movie and have a nice in-depth discussion. We definitely had some tangents, but it was fun. I enjoyed it, and I would love to do this again if you're willing to jump in again on maybe some other topics. But folks, if you would like to get in touch with Professor Perlmutter, you're going to have to look him up, because he does not want his contact info in the description, which I totally get. But you can go ahead and scroll back to the beginning of this video and look up where he said that he teaches, and reach out to him that way, because there is contact information out there for him.
I will accept a magical scroll in the mouth of a dragon flying to my office. If anybody does that, I will respond. Absolutely.
Same here. I'll take a dragon and a scroll, or an owl and a scroll, because I love Harry Potter too. So, but I guess that's it. Please like, subscribe, and comment, even if it's just with an emoji. It's a free way to support this channel. Or if you're feeling super generous, you can check out my Patreon, Ko-fi, or you can hit the money heart thanks button down below. You can become a monthly subscriber, or you can leave a one-time tip, and any help is appreciated. So I guess that's it. Be good to yourself.